Now in this first lesson what we're going to create is what I would call a generic tree. In other words, it's something that you can paint very quickly and very easily and that really looks like a tree. And the reason I call it a generic tree is because if we take for example this oak tree with the 4 shots at the different times of the year, you can see if we look at the summer version that it's a typical oak tree in that we've got a very broad flat type of foliage. Although the tree is still quite high, it spreads out very broadly and it's supported by an immensely strong and short stubby trunk. Now imagine that's a maple tree for example, where you have a much more slender trunk and a much taller but narrower sort of foliage, or 101 other different types of deciduous tree that with a little bit of adaptation on your part you can chop and change to your heart's content. And what we're also going to do is have a look at the winter version as well without any of the leaves, because if you can get used to painting a winter tree you very easily see how the structure of a tree works. Right, now I'm going to use 3 brushes to create these 2 trees. One is the number 1 rigger. This one, which we'll use for the main trunk and the main foliage in the summer tree, is the number 10 round brush, and I'm introducing here for the first time a number 6 brush, which is simply a smaller version of the number 10. Right, now I've put together a mixture of phthalo blue and burnt umber, reasonably strong, and it makes a sort of bluey greeny grey. Now you notice that I've not drawn any tree at all, and if you want to do that you can do if you feel more comfortable, but just to show you how easy it is, I'm just going to start off with a tree trunk here like that, and we'll have it on a slight angle, and then I think what we'll do is we'll take a large branch here where it splits there like that, and maybe another branch there. Let this one go up here a little bit like that. Having done the main trunk with the number 10 brush, I'm going to change to the number 6 brush, and that's obviously a little bit smaller and it gives me the ability to create some smaller branches. Now do you see how easy it is to create these smaller branches? I'm just dragging and really sort of flicking up in a random sort of way like that. Now is the time to bring in the rigger, just by flicking and dragging and letting the rigger really just bounce across the paper. Because of the long thin hairs of the brush it tends to bounce and stutter across the paper, but it does give that rather nice staccato and hit and miss effect that's ideal for creating very thin branches. What we're going to do now is to create some highlights on the left hand side of the trunk and on some of the branches, and how we're going to do that is simply by running water down the left hand side like that and take out a nice somewhat muted highlight. You can play around and just agitate the paint. You won't do any damage, you'll probably do a bit of good and actually improve the trunk. Again, it's one of those techniques that again you almost can't make a mistake. That's probably the kiss of death saying that, but I think you know what I mean. Well, while it's damp I said I was going to bring in a touch of lemon yellow, and that just starts to give a nice bit of mossy effect. When I've darkened these top and bottom part of this branch here, I've lightened here, deliberately lightened and blotted out with the paper this smaller branch that's coming over here, and that immediately puts that in front of that, so it gives that 3-dimensional effect. Right, now with the merest touch of the dark colour we're using for the tree and a little bit of the lemon yellow, I'm just going to blend that tree trunk into the ground. Remember, with trees there's often as much root base below the ground as there is tree above it, and you've got to believe that that tree is capable of standing upright in all sorts of weathers, and it ain't going to do that if you think you've stuck it down to the ground with a bit of wood glue. Now normally I'd leave it like that, I'm quite happy with that, but some people like to put a bit of a canopy of an impression of the fine twigs that you get at the outer edges of the branches. We'll get a little bit more burnt umber into this mix, taking the bulk of that out on the paper towel. What I'm going to do is just, you see the way I'm holding the brush, I'm holding it sideways on like that, or if you wanted to you could hold it like that, it doesn't matter, whatever's comfortable for you. And I'm just going to scrape downwards like that, almost starting from the outer edges and scraping inwards. Now I hope you can see what I've also done slightly is vary the colour. We've got a sort of a browny grey here, where we've got more of a greeny grey here. So that's quite useful to give us a little bit of variety. And putting this canopy on also then justifies a little bit more of the shadow you've got from a watery sun shining through these little twigs and bits and pieces. So there we are, there's the winter tree. Right, now we're going to move on to the summer tree, but before I do, I'm going to pre-mix 3 or 4 colours. I've mixed a lemon yellow mix with just a tiny touch of the phthalo blue, and I really do mean a tiny touch, and a tiny touch of the burnt umber, just to stop the phthalo blue making the lemon yellow look too fluorescent. And I've done another mix of the same 2 colours with just a little bit stronger this time, a little bit more blue, but again some brown in just to keep it as a mellow green. And then finally I've mixed burnt umber and phthalo blue to make this greeny, almost black colour, which we'll use for the darker shadows. And I'm going to use again the colours that we used here for the trunk in the winter tree. Now all I'm going to do is start off by taking a brush full of this lightest greeny yellow colour, and then I'm going to use, again I'm using the side of the brush here, and this time I'm just going to try and picture a tree in my mind. It's not going to be the oak tree, it's going to be, I suppose, look at that, that's I suppose a sort of banana shape, and then maybe we can have another little sort of roundish shape there. I'll just touch it here and there, let that touch together like that, and maybe another banana shape, of a smaller banana shape, just touching here and there like that. Now there's the outline of a tree already that you see 100 times a day. That's required no painting skill other than sliding the brush sideways, holding it like that. I must keep going because otherwise this is going to dry in. Now what I'm going to do is pick up, still with the number 10 brush, that middle colour, and I'm going to just drop it in underneath here. And you can see while that paint here is still wet, it's just here and there, starting to dry out, but not to worry. Just here and there it's running up and mixing and blending quite nicely. Now while that's happening, you can see already you've got a very convincing tree, and we haven't even painted the trunk, and we've only used 2 colour, well, the 2 strengths of colour, the 2 strengths of the green. Now what I'm going to do is to go into this very dark, almost black colour that we've created. I'm concentrating on this going particularly in the centre of the tree because that's where the darkest part of the tree would be. But you see how every time you have a sky hole, the shadow colour goes over the top of it, not underneath it. Right, I think we'll have this tree trunk slightly angled this way, and you can see it's quite a slim trunk, but it's got to be, always remember, it's got to be strong enough to support all this foliage here. I think we'll have just a hint of a main branch coming off here, and just a hint of maybe a main branch coming off there like that. It's a very simple matter to just imagine that these are disappearing and reappearing in these sky holes. Each time they're getting thinner and smaller. Now then, here's a chance for you to put a little bit more shadow on the tree. What I'm going to do, without lifting any of that colour, is I'm going to put most of that water on there like that, and then just throw in some of that strong tree colour, perhaps even stronger, because there's so much water. Now you can see the way that's starting to pull across with the water already in quite a nice way, and we can be quite ruthless with this. This is going to be quite dark underneath here. Now, as you can see, I've painted a green base using the colours I'd used for the lighter part of the tree for the field. I've also blended the bottom of the tree, the roots, into the ground as I did with this, and I've added some shadow, this time quite a bit stronger shadow, more based on the middle colour we used in the trees here. Notice that the shadow as well is predominantly to the right of the tree because the sun's coming from left to right, and that's where the shadow will be cast, but there's still some shadow on this side of the tree where these have cast a shadow. And you can see, I think, how you can adjust the shape of this tree, and this one in fact, to create a wider, flatter, taller, smaller tree, a wider trunk or a narrower trunk, to create a generic tree that'll serve you well throughout your painting.